Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. So glad you all are here. We are ready to get rolling this morning in week 3 of our book study with Hassan Davis. We're so excited. Glad everybody could join us and keep coming back every week. We are excited about it. So thank you for being here. Hassan, we're going to turn it over to you. I don't think we have a whole lot that we need to get out of the way, but I'll make just a couple of announcements before we do that. I know you guys are very interested in professional development. That's why you're here. So I would like to just share some information with you about some upcoming professional development events that we have. We have partnered with GREC, which is the Green River Educational Co-op in Bowling Green, to provide you with a professional development opportunity on June 18th. That will be a virtual program featuring Jennifer Gonzalez from the Cult of Pedagogy, who will be sharing some information with us about best practices in alternative education, along with breakout sessions all day. That'll be a free registration for any of our programs and staff people who are interested in participating. We'll be sending out links for registration to all of our folks soon, but it's another great opportunity. As this one we continue today and wrap up next week, we want to make sure that you have additional opportunities for professional development and continued growth throughout the summer. So we hope you'll be able to join us on June 18th for that learning experience. In addition to that, just wanted you guys to know that the Kentucky Alternative Education Summit, which is our large professional development conference that is held each summer, will still take place on July 21st and 22nd, but we are moving that also to a virtual format. And so we will be sharing information with you very soon about that. Again, some of you, I see shocked faces on here, but the reason for that is the governor has issued guidance, obviously, about large gatherings of people. And as of July 1, he is recommending that we can have groups of 50 come back together. And we typically have 350 to 400 people for that event in July. So it just doesn't seem as though it will be feasible for in-person meetings during that time. We hope that it would have been. But we're excited about the new format. We think it'll be a great opportunity for you all to continue to get wonderful professional development opportunities. So be on the lookout for that as well. That's July 21st and 22nd. And we have lots of great things planned for you and continue to do that into the fall. So thank you for being here. Hope that you all can join us for those as well. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to Mr. Hassan Davis. Hassan, welcome back.
Thank you, Ronnie. Thanks, Katie. Good morning, everybody. How y'all doing? Good. I hope you had a great weekend. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers, belated, and still doing good work. I'm excited today to move in this conversation. I think first I want to start by saying, going back through these chapters, this section was really hard for me. As you may have noticed, this was a time in my life where I had some of my greatest successes and my greatest failures rolling at the same time. And the idea of trying to balance those and to stay focused and stay positive. When I think about the work we do and the young folks that get connected in these systems and continue to try to move out, one of the stories that recycles over and over is this almost out, right? You know, we see it all the time where they doing so well in our programs, we got them motivated and they see themselves as powerful, and then some event outside of our purview, outside of our control, hits them, and boom, it drags them back. And I think that by now in my story, you can see that happen over and over again. And the struggle that young people transitioning have of trying to honor the thing that helped them survive at the same time as they try to give some focus and some real attention to people like you all who are telling them, no, there's more for you, right? And it was such a struggle for me. And I think that in these 4 or 5 chapters we just read, it was probably the most obvious that, you know, my life was like a yo-yo, and trying to stay balanced and look at those successes and not feel like an imposter and want to accept the easy way out. You know, it was so easy to keep a go bag. I kept that go bag in my closet until I got married, until, you know, I was still not convinced that life was going to allow me to just settle in one place and be happy with that, because there was so much other trauma and drama. And so this was, again, moments like Wilderness Adventure Camp and my Upper Bound experience, working with these young people who didn't look like, think like, act like, talk like me, didn't come from places like me. You know, they were from from Perry County and Pulaski County and Wayne County and Floyd County. These guys that I thought had no connection to my life, and finally getting to a point where I realized that there were these amazing. Once I got past looking for my differences, right, and could actually start to feel connections and those similarities, really wanting to engage and build these relationships. And so what I'd like to do, as we move in, and I read the feedback last week, and so I'm going to try and create some more time for us to talk. And so our breakout session is going to be shorter, just a chance for you all to check in and connect around the question. But I want to start, Katie, if I can share the screen. I want to talk a little bit more about why. The question I used to get a lot, and I still do, is why does a person who has run juvenile justice systems, served as vice chair of the Federal Commission on Juvenile Justice, you know, done everything in juvenile justice, spend so much time talking about education and talking to educators? I used to be told I was getting out of my lane quite a bit, but it really struck me early in my career that if we were really trying to reform justice, we were trying to create for young people who fall into these systems the best chance out. One of the things that I recognize, and you've seen it as you've read the book, is education was absolutely the key to that. Even in those moments where education wasn't perfect for me, having those individuals who were able to stand in with me in those difficult places allowed me to see myself and recognize the possibilities. So I'm gonna try and share my screen because I want to take you through just a little bit of a PowerPoint that I use quite a bit with educators, with lawmakers when I'm making the pitch for how we support education more and build this work that we're trying to do. So if you can see my screen, this is a high school dropout picture that I often start with. And when I talk about education, it's really a backtrack, and people get confused because I don't get to the word education early. The first thing I do is I talk about arrests. High school graduations. We know that high school dropouts are 3.5 times more likely than graduates to be arrested. High school dropouts are more than 8 times as likely to experience jail or prison at least once. High school dropouts are between the ages of 16 and 24 are 63 times more likely to be institutionalized than their peers who graduate high school and go on to some kind of degree system, associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, a certification, some kind of professional ending. And when we look at the juvenile justice system, we can start to see. So dropout, arrest, take us into systems. Systems, by default, do what they do. What you probably know as well as I do is the majority of the young people who wind up not just in formal justice settings, but also those other alternative settings are young people with disabilities, many of them facing challenges much more severe or drastic than mine. The trauma, the drama, and the pain all coalescing into this cocktail of chaos that drives them into systems. And I'm not going to read all this. I'll make this section of slides available through Katie, but all of the data talks about young people with disabilities in the system, tells us that one touch with the system for a young person with a disability almost guarantees a consistent and successive engagements that become longer and more involved. A lot of it is because of the capacity of facilities and systems like that to do the work of really rehabilitating or engaging young people in the kind of counseling they need and the supports that they deserve. And young people with trauma are usually traumatized by systems that don't really take that into account. And you all know, like I do, there are things that we have to do for safety and security that are not in line with mental health and engagement in a way that on a daily basis allows us to be successful. So that brings us to this. This is the piece that I really want you to see. When I was commissioner, I had the opportunity to serve on a lot of national boards, and we had the Association of Juvenile Administrators, but I was at a conference in Colorado, and a woman named Dana Swayze from the Minnesota Department of Juvenile Justice had just published a report talking about the students in their system and talking about some of the things that were going on. And she developed this image right here. And the reason this is probably the moment in my career where everything started to make sense. If you look at this diagram that Dana created, you'll notice that she's taken all the major theories of development, Havinghurst, Kohlberg, Piaget, all those guys that we studied, human development. And then she took the adolescent brain science, the new science that we have of the adolescent brain, that 0 to 25 adolescent brain development, and she created this chart. And if you look at it, segment by segment, each of these quadrants, she's been able to track developmental theory and attach it to age requirements. So we can talk about developmental tasks that have to be accomplished for a young person to matriculate into the next quadrant successfully along with their peers. And what really struck me about this is if we think about this as a clock, and every time a young person experiences some trauma, some drama, or some pain, there's a divorce, there's abuse, there's an attack, there's homeless because we got put out, we haven't eaten in 3 days consistently. Every time a young person experiences one of those, the clock stops. And no matter how good our services are, how quick we respond and get them back on track, over time, that young person might find themselves seconds, minutes, eventually hours behind their peer cohort. And so by the time they get into the third quadrant, where they're starting to look like grown people, they may still be reacting to the world out of second quadrant, even first quadrant thinking. And we usually end up with them in that third quadrant, where they behave and their behavior is no longer something that we consider a challenge or a call for help, but a defiance or a resistance to authority. And they usually wind up in our systems. And they're still responding to the world in the second, third quadrant. Now, this didn't make a lot of sense to me until I started doing some work with returning citizens, individuals returning from long-term incarceration and trying to get back into the world. And I was meeting with a reentry counselor who was frustrated because a couple of people on their workload had made transition, had some success. They got them into a job, got them into a space. But they were like, but they, every time something happens, they're so immature. They keep acting and doing these things that don't make any sense. These are grown men, and I can't believe they keep acting like children. And I remember when that used to be my response. But then when I looked at this chart, it made perfect sense. If you start to take me out of my peer cohort at an early age and my clock continues to stop and delay over time, it may be that I'm a 40-year-old man still reacting to the world in third quadrant or second quadrant because that's where the world stopped for me. Does that make sense? And so our ability to be able to recognize that and start to tailor our responses and our supports to help move them back along the track, to give them the kind of supports and go back and fill in the gaps that they didn't have filled in as young men and women, will allow us to start to move them more successfully through those transitions to adulthood. And so this became kind of the big picture that I kept on my wall as I continued to move through the work that we had to do to shift our systems to make sure that we were looking very intentionally at how we develop young people along this path. So no matter what their trauma, their drama, or their pain, we were able to reconnect with them and get that clock started as fast as possible, and sometimes even make up time. And I think that in my own experience, that's been some of the things that I've noticed and recognized quite a bit. And that takes us into what I call the affective domain. The idea that in education, if we can consider not just that cognition, the ability for young people to intellectually engage and math and science, but also to the emotional connection, the feeling house. Dr. Willie Parker, one of my mentors, shared this with me once and just blew my mind. And he said, when we do that Bloomberg's taxonomy, I always get confused with that. And we talk about cognition, how important that is. They always leave the other part out, which is the affective domain. And without the heart, the head really can't engage completely. And so our ability to connect with them across both of those is important. And I think the work that we've seen in social emotional learning really does do that best. And it's the things that we've done for so many times where we engage young people and create spaces that are safe for them, that allow them to really feel that they have control. And then from there, they can really start to build out from themselves to others. And social emotional learning is a great way for us to engage. And the challenge is very often when young people find themselves deeper in systems, the first thing that we take away are those engagement opportunities. And because we think that they need so much correction that we need to get away from play, but actually play is absolutely, and play not just in the ha-ha sense, but the sense of engagement and wonder and sharing that allow folk to be part of a bigger world. And so my experience of that has been in the arts. And our creative engagement has been the thing that saved me in so many ways. But young people, me having those chances, and I try to make sure I can talk in terms that are really clear for me personally, me having those chances of creative engagement were often the critical moments in my life where they helped me navigate difficulties and put voice to them in a way that allowed me to de-escalate. Creative writing became so powerful to me because it allowed me to get the world in my heart that was eating me up out into the world where I could see it and other people could see it before I carried outside the door like a loaded gun in my head. And so I really think that our ability to continue to give young people those creative opportunities is important. Connecting them to pro-social engagement. And so it goes back to hope, which is, I mentioned to you all in our first session, that seed planted in rocky soil with no knowledge of how deep its roots will sink or how many its fruit will feed. And our idea of being able to stay hopeful for these young folks, even as we still deal with their challenges and the truth of where we are, right? It's the present and the possible being held in the same mind at the same time so that we can see that through line and how we might be a part of it. So what I want to do right now, this is going to be our effective question for today in our breakouts. We're going to break you out and for a 5-minute conversation, but I want you to think about this here. And you saw it in the book, I quoted at least once, but then I talk about this in my own experience quite a bit. The only place you will find that ability comes before opportunity is in the dictionary. We talk so often about what young people ought to be able to do, but we don't create the space to show them, to let them practice those things in so many ways so that when they get to the real test, they're proficient in it. I always say it's like taking a kid to the parking lot of the pool to teach them how to swim. Unless we put them in the water, unless we give them a chance to try those things, then it's going to be really difficult to gauge whether they can be successful. And sometimes that's what our sending them on field trips, right? The kid like me who could never go on a field trip because say, well, he act right, we take him on the trips. But if you took me on more trips, I learned to act right. It's apple, or it's the cart before the horse, right? And so I want you to go to your breakout sessions, 5 minutes, and I want you to think about this quote. The only place you'll find that ability comes before opportunity is in the dictionary. I want to talk about your experience of creating opportunity, or where you've seen young people in your systems or in your classes could be better served if we gave them chances to engage and try new things and grow them into competency in those things. Does that make sense? Let's see. Lost all of you. Okay, so we're going to do 5 minutes in breakouts. I'm going to come back, report back, and then have some more conversation. Is that okay with y'all? All right, Katie's going to do the magical Hogwarts teleportation thing.
All right, here we go.
It's like the magical teleportation flute on Hogwarts. I think it's so fun. All right. Looks like everybody's back. Let's looks like we have maybe 8 rooms. So let's go ahead and get some feedback from the rooms. Room 1, anybody from room 1 want to share what you all talked about? Or if you don't know what room you're in, I don't either, so can't help you.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm Jeff from Group 1. Just Kyle and Rhonda and myself, just 3 of us this morning. But we talked about the quote. Excuse me, the quote you're talking about, opportunity, and like you were saying, Hassan, if you don't have your behavior right, you're not given the opportunity in the field trips. And we find so many of the kids in alternative education, because of the behavior issues, they're not given that opportunity to grow. And we kind of talked about that, and we talked about breaking the cycle of poverty where there's not value in education, where a lot of these kids are coming from, and as educators, how we need to try to change that, and which it's a challenge.
Good point. Thank you, Jeff. How about room 2?
Okay, I was in room 2. We talked a lot about, very similarly to what Jeff just said, how so many of the students that we teach are in our settings because of issues that have happened, and so it's not. And so we were talking about how do you create that opportunity in that kind of situation, and we talked about how important it is to create opportunity in the small things first, so that students can build their confidence. And learn the behaviors that in different situations. I think so often people who don't know how to react in a situation when they're uncomfortable, you have behaviors that you're just not really, unpredictable behaviors. And so I think building confidence in the small things, I think modeling as much as you can. We talked about right now, just while we're doing virtual learning, there's so many virtual field trips that are there that you could really take the time to kind of model when you're in this situation. How would people dress? What voice level would people, just so that students have confidence that they could move forward and kind of start climbing those ladders to feel some more success in the future. And we talked a lot about just very real, authentic rewards and encouragement, and helping students believe in themselves by believing in them ourselves. So.
Great, thank you so much. Room 3.
I'll go ahead and speak. There were 3 of us in our group, and we kind of talked about, the opportunities again. And I learned early on my career 26 years ago that as a PD teacher, that a lot of our kids weren't able to or allowed to go on field trips. So I ended up being the field trip queen, because I felt like they needed to be, have those opportunities. So, I had different age levels in my classroom, so it felt like I was always going. The principal, I remember him, he's like, well, then you're responsible for everything they do. I was like, no, they're responsible for everything they do, but I'll help them get through it. But we also talked about the same kind of thing, about how to get creative to have opportunities for kids in our A6 schools that, we don't have a whole lot of control of when they're allowed to go and that kind of thing. So just using the new mindset here, I guess, of being very creative and seeing what opportunities we can provide them.
Great, thank you. Room 5? If you don't know, I don't know.
Is
Hi.
it Marcia? There we go.
Hi,
Okay.
can you hear me? All right, my name is Trish, and I was in the group with Becky, Marcia, and Catherine, yep, and myself. And one of the things that we talked about was we were all talking about the situation regarding Kay, and how you took him up on how you led a group up to in the wilderness for a week. And we were talking about how you guys were in a situation and where there was a student that was in a tent. He had an adverse effect, and he was in a tent, and he was refusing to come out. And when all else fails, I'm sorry, her name was Vicky Martin, sorry, she was the other person in the group. But when all else failed, you know, you guys went to Kay, you allowed him to help him solve the situation. We talked about how much confidence that gave him going forward. And we talked about how, you know, looking at our students that we work with, you know, how many opportunities do they get to be in a situation where they can be that problem solver for their group? And if they had more opportunities like that, how might that transform the way that they're thinking and lead them into how they would just transform the way that they're thinking about themselves, if that makes sense, but also change the way that they're thinking to the point where they're not going down those same roads before, where they're picking a higher road, where they're believing that they can be better. And one of the things that I found as we were talking, I had read a really good book this year called Dyslexia: Teacher's Journey by Ruth Fuller Lachurge. She's from Hopkinsville, Kentucky, and Mr. Hassan, she had done some work at Berea College, to my understanding. She talks about Berea College in her book as well. But I'm going to quote something that she said from a study, a 2000 study. According to the U.S. Department of Education, 60% of America's prison inmates are illiterate, and 85% of all juvenile offenders have reading problems. And I thought to myself, is that the main problem that we're seeing with our young people when they're in these situations? Is it really because that they are illiterate? You know, is that the main problem here that we know that we're looking at? And if so, Dr. Courier's research, she later says, in Dr. Courier's research, the incidence of dyslexia was among the prison population was 48%, twice the prevalence in the general population. And so again, that got me thinking, you know, with our students, is it possible that a lot of them are illiterate, and that's why they keep going down these same roads in their journey? So
that's a great observation, Trish. Thank you. Yeah, I think that the data bears that out in a number of ways. It's funny you mentioned Kay. I had just written his name in my notebook when you started to speak, and so that was top of my mind too. His experience was definitely indicative of the idea of opportunity and ability. Group 7, is that right, or 5? 7.
I'm group 7. My name's Sally, and we are the education branch at central office. And one thing that we talked about is, actually, we're giving a shout out to Amanda and Moorhead, because they had a prom last year for their girls. And I went with the girls to pick out their dresses here in Frankfurt. And the difference that it made in those girls, they most of them had never had anything like that. They couldn't believe they looked like that. You know, they ever had that experience. They had nothing compared to what so many of us just take for granted. And I think that we went, my husband and my son and I went up there to deliver some stuff when they got finished, and they had it all decorated. The staff they just did a great job. And I know that those girls said that they would never forget that. And we were just able to offer them something that most people never have.
That's great.
And yes, I did go to that's at the church here in Frankfurt. And my Bunko group does that. So my Bunko group contributes and works with Amy on that. So they had a ball, and they took them first so that they wouldn't have be around, you know, other kids not in that situation, and where they wouldn't feel uncomfortable. And it was just a great experience. It was a great experience for me. I learned a lot out of it. And they enjoyed it so much, and we were able to give them something that they would have never had.
Great, Charlie. Thank you. And I remember that. Yeah, that's a great program. Room 8.
Hi, this week I was working with both Angie Austin and then also Azure D. Garland. When we were talking about it, one of the big things that came up is every day is a new day and everybody deserves a clean slate. A common theme, I didn't mention it when we were in our group session, but a common theme that I heard from Angie and Azure D, and I've also experienced it in my school, is that we don't want somebody else telling us what a particular student has done in the past or what they can and can't do. We want to find out for ourselves what they can and can't do. I know for me personally, I try to avoid finding out what a student's record is, what they did before they came into my classroom. I try to avoid that for the entirety of my interactions with them. Of course, sometimes it's unavoidable because they'll bring it up in the classroom casually. But I try not to let that color my interactions with those students. And I feel like that is giving them those additional opportunities that they don't see elsewhere.
Thanks, Courtney. Room 9.
Sorry, there we go. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned basically being an advocate for students. I find that, you know, on the way in, but also on the way out. You know, with our kids getting placed all over the state, depending, you know, if they're a DCBS kid, DJJ kid, whatever, sometimes they just transition because of things outside of our control, often actually. And it's always amazing to me how often I'll get a phone call or an email wanting a transcript before they actually do a records request, because they want to decide, you know, where they want to stick this kid since they're a day treatment kid. You know, some of my kids are placed because they're DCBS and they have multiple massive traumas. And yet, you know, because they were in, you know, DJJ day treatment, you know, they're immediately gone to the alternative school or this place. And, you know, it's funny, there's one little girl I'm thinking about that bounced 7 times, and I talked to 7 different high schools this year. She was perfect with us. She did a great job. And yet she bounced 7 different placements because she was always stuck in alternative. And finally, I talked to a principal in Barron County, and I just said, look, give her a chance, let her try. And this principal actually followed through, and she did, and she hooked her up with a mentor inside the high school. And this little girl's been in there the rest of the year, and it's been awesome. And I you know, that for me is frustrating, you know, that battle almost every single time, even within my own district, to give them an opportunity, and just to say, hey, let them try. You know, if they don't make it, they don't make it. And you know what? Sometimes they're not going to make it, and we have to be okay with that, but they need the opportunity.
That's a great point. Thank you. Room 9, or did we just do 9? 11, room 11.
Hi. Thanks, Sally. The girls really do enjoy going on that trip. I was in a group with Justin, Ricky, and Nick, and we just kind of talked about approach and how you approach a situation or how you approach a kid. The majority of the youth that we work with usually have some kind of traumatic experience or background, and a lot of the times they're act out as a result of that. So we just kind of talked about how you know, you approach the situation, you know, the difference between how you approached Kay and how his social worker approached him. And when he saw that, you know, the difference in how you communicate and talk with the student is a big deal with them. And it also helps you to build that relationship with them and gain that trust and have a better time. We also talked about, you know, students going from, you know, placement to placement within our facilities, and supposedly they've been really bad at this place or they've acted up and everything, you know, and we don't see that a lot of the times. You know, I kind of talked to them about one student specifically. Justin had brought up about on page 114 that you had talked about. What is sad is that eventually some of those professionals lose the ability to believe and hold on to the hope of a better future for these students or, you know, kids that we deal with. And we have one youth that he has a person in his life that should be advocating for him, and all they see is his charges.
Mhm.
And you know, that's kind of a frustration on our end, you know, and having to talk with him and deal with him, you know, after he's gotten off a phone call or a video conference or something like that, and letting him know, you know, you're a person, you know, we'll deal with this, we'll, you know, get through this. And the more that he realized that, you know, we were there to help him, and that, you know, we're not looking at his charges, we're not judging him for, you know, what he's done or whatever, that, you know, we want to try to make a difference with him. He's, you know, we never had a problem with him to begin with, and he's become more respectful towards, you know, this person that should be advocating for him. And things have kind of come around for him, and he's starting to be a little bit more successful in his goals that he has set for himself. So that's kind of the route that we went with it.
Great. And thank you, Amanda. And thank all of you. I think that there's some great insight, and I heard a couple of things that really struck me. The idea of creating those opportunities. I remember my mother used to pack us up and get us dressed up and take us down to the theater and to the High Museum of Art downtown Atlanta. And people would say things like, you know, she shouldn't be spending her money on those kind of things. You know, they barely, and the idea, and that she's always been clear about, is that she wanted to make sure we understood that not having money didn't mean that you didn't have a right to things, you know, to want things, to try things. And so going to the theater and learning how to sit still and listen to someone drone on, and what you all know, like I do, our young folks now, they can't sit and for 20 minutes, but you know, but those types of things, going out and doing service when you're being served yourself. That's what I think was so powerful about Kay's story. You know, when he finally felt that he actually saw himself as part of a solution, all of a sudden everything else starts to look different to you when you know you can be a part of the other side of that. And I think that it's important. There's this quote. I was doing a training up in Minnesota at their maximum security juvenile prison for educators and youth workers. And it was a 2-day training. And the second day, one of the teachers finally said, you know, Hassan, this was great, but when is it finally okay to give up? And I was like, what? She's like, you know, I mean, we love these kids and we do this work all the time and we're committed, but when is it okay for us to finally say we've done enough and not feel bad about it? And the first thing I did was thank her for being honest, right? Because I've had that sense, right? I was like, is this finally enough that I can walk away and be like, you know, okay, I'm not, but I finally said, you know what? I was trying to, you know, be philosophical. I said, maybe it's okay to give up on these kids when you think it's okay for somebody to give up on you when you were that age and you had made that kind of choice. And she was like, oh, I was a terrible kid. They should have, and I was like, okay, that's not it. I was like, yeah, baby. Maybe it's okay to give up on these kids when you think it would be okay for somebody to give up on your children. And I was like, that's a pretty good answer. I was like proud of myself. And she was like, oh, my kid's so bad. I was like, all right, that's not it either. And I said, so it took me, so I was struggling. I said, okay, I got it. I said, working for our students is like wrestling an 800-pound alligator. She was like, what? I was like, yeah. When you wrestle an 800-pound alligator, the best advice I can give you is you don't give up when you get tired. You only give up when the alligator get tired. And the alligator we wrestle don't get tired, y'all. So sometimes we got to tag out. Sometimes we got to get back up. But we have to hold on, because the longer we can hold on and roll with this monster, the bigger the chance is that it'll finally calm down and it can see that there's something else out there, right? I always talk about the alligator because the amygdala, when we talk about that brain science, right? The amygdala, they call it the alligator brain because it just reacts to the world out of instinct, out of, you know, threat, perceived or real. And so when we're wrestling that alligator, we got to be committed to it. I think that's where really the hope comes in, right? It's not just being hopeful that we can transform our life, but we have to hold that in ourselves, right? I always say that I always call hope, I have this quote, possession with the intent to distribute. People are like, you can't say that. So, well, you know, yeah, I'm a hope dealer. position with the intent to distribute. And it's about what we can give out to folks to substitute for the other things that they've been trying to use to make them feel good short term, by creating some long-term success and some inroads into possibilities. And again, we're not talking about guarantees. We are not in the guarantee business. But our job every day is to make sure that we hold out the possibility that if you hold on and you move forward with us, something could change. And that incremental steps taking, holding hands, being engaged, giving them space for their voices. Those are all important pieces of how we create the spaces that we know young people deserve in order to thrive. Falling down is not failing until they finally give up the idea that standing up is even an option. And so sometimes our job, the job that my mother had that she took on, was just saying, ooh, that looked like it hurt. Here, baby, let me help you up. You need to try this again. And sometimes that's all we got. But sometimes that's enough to keep the possibility alive, the belief that somebody else is invested enough in where we are right now, and they're going to keep on walking with us until either we get to a better place or we finally decide to walk far enough away from them that they can't. And that's our job, holding that line between harm and hope, with the possibility that because you are in the breach, one more life will move past it into something better. And I say this a lot, but I'm not saying this because I saw the Oprah Winfrey Dr. Phil special, y'all. Right? This ain't that magazine at the Walmart checkout. I know this. I know what happens when people who don't have to choose to make each child important and possible in their lives. The only reason I'm here, the only reason that I'm not 6 feet under like my 5 cousins, or 60 years in like my brothers, is because somebody, multiple people over time, continued to reflect to me what was possible and dared me to dream big enough for that to become my truth, my real. And that's the work you all do every day. And so I want to thank you all for the amazing work, for being committed, engaging with me. I've had a wonderful time reconnecting with so many of you all in this work and in this unique conversation. I'm excited and sad for next week. It's like, what do you mean we're almost done? But I think we are. We've got one more section of the book to read. I read somebody's comments that they couldn't put it down. Yeah, you'd be like, what's this fool gonna do next? That's, when I was reading, I was like, man, I really made a lot of bad choices, really close together at times. But again, having those people with clearer voices and saner thoughts connected to me helped me always see that there was a light, maybe not always bright, but there was a light against that darkness that I could always follow. And having the courage to do that sometimes wasn't easy, but ultimately, y'all won out. The people who believed great things won out over the people who accepted the worst possible things. And so I want to be thankful for that. Next week, I'm going to share some of Hassan's rules, some of my rules for Hope Dealers, called the Hope Dealers Handbook, and some thoughts on the amazing work you all continue to do, and hopefully have some more great dialogue about how we continue to be that shining light against the darkness for so many young folks. I want to thank you all for another great day of conversation. I want to thank you always for the amazing work you do, especially in these times where the work has to be different, but it cannot stop. You are literally the front line. You are the wall. Everything else is just safety and security. You all create the possibility. And that's why I'm so excited to have a chance to be in this conversation with you, because I know in my life, it was folks that look like you, act like you, think like you, talk like you that made me possible. So I'm grateful for that every day. And I look forward to having the chance to see all of y'all shining faces again next week. And I hope you have an amazing week with the chance to impact so many young folks. Thanks, y'all. Have a great week.